A young millionaire let an old woman and her homeless daughter live in his garage, but one day when he entered without knocking on the door, he could not believe what she was doing. John Smith stood at the expansive window of his third-floor study, gazing out at the manicured grounds of his sprawling estate. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, casting long shadows across the perfectly trimmed lawn. It was a view that many would envy, but for John, it only served as a reminder of his isolation. At 30 years old, John had achieved what most would consider the pinnacle of success. His tech startup, born from a brilliant idea in his college dorm room, had skyrocketed in value, making him a multi-millionaire before his 25th birthday. He had everything money could buy: a mansion that rivaled small hotels, a fleet of luxury cars, and more gadgets than he knew what to do with. Yet, as he stood there in his tailor-made suit, he felt a gnawing emptiness that no amount of wealth seemed able to fill. John's phone buzzed in his pocket, breaking the silence. He pulled it out, expecting another business call or perhaps an invitation to some high society event he'd rather avoid. Instead, it was a reminder. Visit Mom's grave, 5 years today. A lump formed in his throat as he remembered the day he'd lost his mother, Sarah. She had been his rock, his confidant, the one person who saw him as more than just a success story or a potential business connection. Her passing had left a void in his life that he hadn't been able to fill, despite his best efforts. With a heavy sigh, John pocketed his phone and made his way downstairs. The house was quiet, save for the faint hum of the air conditioning and the occasional beep from one of the many smart devices scattered throughout. As he passed the kitchen, Mrs. Rodriguez, his housekeeper, looked up from her task of preparing his dinner. "Going out, Mr. Smith?" she asked, a hint of concern in her voice. She had been with him since he bought the mansion and had become something of a surrogate mother figure, though John always maintained a polite distance. "Just for a walk," he replied with a forced smile. "I need some fresh air." Mrs. Rodriguez nodded, her eyes reflecting a mix of understanding and worry. "Don't stay out too late. There's a chill in the air tonight." John thanked her and headed out the front door, eschewing his usual chauffeur-driven car for a solitary stroll. As he walked down the long driveway, he felt the weight of his loneliness pressing down on him. He had acquaintances, business partners, and employees, but no one he could truly call a friend. His wealth, once a source of excitement and possibility, now felt like a barrier between him and the rest of the world. Lost in thought, John barely noticed as he left the confines of his gated community and wandered into the less affluent neighborhoods nearby. The change in scenery was stark. Modest homes replaced mansions and well-worn cars lined the streets instead of luxury vehicles. As he walked, he found himself envying the sounds of family dinners and friendly gatherings drifting from open windows. It was then that he noticed her. Sitting on a bench near a small, unkempt park was an elderly woman. Her clothes were worn and mismatched, her grey hair unkempt beneath a faded floral scarf. Beside her sat a small cart filled with what appeared to be her worldly possessions. Despite her obvious hardship, there was a dignity in her posture, a spark in her eyes that spoke of a rich inner life. John found himself slowing as he approached, drawn by a mix of curiosity and an inexplicable sense of connection. As he drew closer, he saw that the woman was hunched over a tattered sketchbook, her gnarled hands moving with surprising grace as she drew. "Excuse me," John said softly, not wanting to startle her. "I couldn't help but notice your drawing. Are you an artist?" The woman looked up, her bright blue eyes meeting John's. For a moment, he felt an odd sense of familiarity, quickly dismissed as imagination. "Once upon a time," she replied, her voice warm despite a hint of wariness. "Now, I'm just Betty, the old lady who lives on this bench." She chuckled, but there was a sadness behind her laughter. John felt a sudden urge to help this woman, to connect with her in a way he hadn't connected with anyone in years. "I'm John," he said, extending his hand. "Would you mind if I took a look at your work?" Betty hesitated for a moment, then handed over the sketchbook. John's eyes widened as he flipped through the pages. Despite the poor quality of the paper and the stubby pencil she was using, the drawings were exquisite. Landscapes, portraits, and abstract pieces filled the book, each one speaking of talent and years of practice. "These are incredible," John breathed. "You're not just an artist, Betty. You're a master." Betty's cheeks colored slightly at the praise. That's kind of you to say. But that was another life long ago. John's mind raced. Here was a woman of obvious talent reduced to living on the streets. Before he could second-guess himself, he heard himself saying, "Betty, I have a proposition for you. I have a large house with plenty of space, including a garage apartment that's currently empty. Would you consider staying there? In return, you could help with some light gardening or household tasks." Betty's eyes narrowed, suspicion replacing the warmth. "Why would you offer such a thing to a stranger? What's the catch?" John shook his head, realizing how his offer must sound. "No catch, I promise. I've been feeling very alone lately, and something about your art spoke to me. I'd like to help if you'll let me. And maybe we could be friends." The vulnerability in his voice seemed to reach Betty. Her expression softened and she studied John's face intently. After what felt like an eternity, she nodded slowly. "You're either the kindest soul I've met in years, or the world's worst conman," she said with a wry smile. "But something tells me you're genuine, and I won't pretend the idea of a roof over my head and a warm bed doesn't appeal. All right, John, I'll take you up on your offer, at least for now." Relief and excitement washed over John. For the first time in months, he felt a spark of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, his life was about to change for the better. As they gathered Betty's few possessions and began the walk back to John's mansion, neither of them could have predicted the journey they were about to embark on. A journey that would uncover long-buried secrets, rekindle forgotten passions, and ultimately reshape both their lives in ways they could never have imagined. The sun had fully set by the time they reached the gates of John's estate, the warm glow of the mansion's lights a beacon in the gathering darkness. As they walked up the driveway, John couldn't help but smile at the thought of Mrs. Rodriguez's reaction to their unexpected guest. Little did he know that Betty's arrival was just the beginning of a series of events that would challenge everything he thought he knew about himself, his past, and the true meaning of family. The following morning, John awoke to the unfamiliar sound of movement in his usually quiet mansion. For a moment he lay in bed, disoriented, before the events of the previous evening came rushing back. Betty, the elderly artist he'd invited to stay in his garage apartment. A smile tugged at his lips as he remembered the look of wonder on her face when they'd arrived at his home. As John made his way downstairs, he could hear hushed voices coming from the kitchen. He paused in the doorway, taking in the scene before him. Mrs. Rodriguez was busy at the stove, while Betty sat at the kitchen island, a steaming mug of coffee in her hands. The two women were chatting animatedly, their laughter filling the usually somber space with warmth. "Good morning," John said, stepping into the kitchen. Both women turned to look at him, and he was struck by how much more relaxed Betty appeared after just one night in a proper bed. "Good morning, Mr. Smith," Mrs. Rodriguez replied, a hint of amusement in her voice. "Your guest and I were just getting acquainted." Betty smiled at John, her blue eyes twinkling. "Your housekeeper has been kind enough to show me around and help me settle in. I hope you don't mind that I've invaded your kitchen." "Not at all," John assured her, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "I'm glad you're making yourself at home. How did you sleep?" "Like a baby," Betty admitted. It's been a long time since I've had such a comfortable bed. Thank you again for your kindness, John." As they sat down to breakfast together, John found himself more at ease than he had been in years. The conversation flowed naturally, with Betty regaling them with stories from her past as an artist in New York City. John was fascinated by her tales of the vibrant art scene of the 1970s and 80s, the passion in her voice evident as she described gallery openings and late-night discussions in smoky cafes. "Whatever happened to make you stop painting?" John asked, immediately regretting his question as a shadow passed over Betty's face. "Life happened," she said softly, her eyes distant. "Sometimes the world has a way of beating the art out of you." An uncomfortable silence fell over the kitchen. Mrs. Rodriguez busied herself with clearing the dishes, while John struggled to find the right words to say. "I'm sorry," he began, but Betty waved him off. "No need to apologize, dear. It's all water under the bridge now." She stood up, smoothing down her borrowed clothes. Mrs. Rodriguez had lent her some things until they could go shopping. "Now, I believe I promised to help with some gardening. Shall we?" Grateful for the change of subject, John led Betty out to the expansive gardens surrounding the mansion. As they worked side by side, planting new flowers and tending to the existing beds, John found himself opening up to Betty in a way he hadn't with anyone since his mother's passing. He told her about the loneliness that plagued him despite his success, the feeling that something was missing from his life. Betty listened attentively, offering gentle words of wisdom and encouragement. "Success is more than just money in the bank, John," she said, patting his arm. "True fulfillment comes from connection, from using your gifts to make the world a little better. You've got a kind heart. That's a gift in itself." As the days turned into weeks, a routine began to develop. John found himself looking forward to their shared breakfasts and gardening sessions. Betty's presence brought a lightness to the mansion that had been missing for years. Even Mrs. Rodriguez seemed more cheerful, often joining them for afternoon tea and lively discussions. One evening, about a month after Betty's arrival, John was passing by the garage apartment when he heard a frustrated sigh. Concerned, he knocked on the door. "Betty, is everything all right?" There was a pause before Betty's voice called out, "Come in, John." He entered to find Betty sitting at a small desk surrounded by sheets of paper covered in half-finished sketches. Her hands were stained with charcoal, and there was a look of frustration on her face that John had never seen before. "What's wrong?" he asked, moving closer to examine the drawings. Betty sighed, running a hand through her silver hair. "I've been trying to really draw for the first time in years, but it's like I've forgotten how. The images are in my head, but I can't seem to get them onto the paper." John's heart went out to her. He could see the pain in her eyes, the longing to create. An idea began to form in his mind. "Betty," he said slowly, "what if we set up a proper studio for you, with all the supplies you need, easels, paints, canvases, everything? Would that help?" Betty looked up at him, her eyes wide with surprise. "Oh, John, that's very kind of you to offer. But I couldn't possibly accept—" "Please," John interrupted, "let me do this for you. Your talent shouldn't go to waste. And besides," he added with a smile, "I'd love to see what you can create when you have the right tools." Tears welled up in Betty's eyes. She reached out and squeezed John's hand. "You remind me so much of someone I used to know," she said softly. "Someone who always believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself." The next day, John threw himself into the project of creating an art studio for Betty. He cleared out a spare room on the ground floor of the mansion, one with large windows that let in plenty of natural light. He ordered the best art supplies he could find, consulting with local artists to ensure he got everything right. When it was finally ready, John led a blindfolded Betty to the door of the studio. "Okay," he said, his voice filled with excitement, "you can look now." Betty removed the blindfold and gasped. The room was a painter's dream, filled with every supply she could possibly need. Easels of various sizes stood ready, surrounded by a rainbow of paints, brushes of all shapes and sizes, and stacks of pristine canvases. "Oh, John," Betty breathed, her eyes shining with tears, "it's perfect." As Betty explored the studio, running her hands over the supplies with reverence, John felt a warmth spreading through his chest. For the first time in years, he felt like he was truly making a difference in someone's life. Little did he know that this act of kindness was about to set in motion a chain of events that would uncover long-buried secrets and change both their lives forever. As Betty picked up a brush, her hand trembling slightly, John couldn't have imagined the masterpiece that was about to emerge, not just on the canvas, but in the intricate tapestry of their intertwined destinies. The art studio became a sanctuary for Betty, and over the next few weeks, John watched in awe as she rediscovered her passion for painting. The frustrated sighs of those first attempts gave way to hours of focused silence, broken only by the soft swish of brush on canvas. And with each passing day, John felt the bonds of their friendship growing stronger, filling a void in his life he hadn't even realized was there. But as Betty's art flourished, so too did the secrets of the past begin to stir, like shadows at the edges of a brightly lit room. Neither John nor Betty could have predicted the revelations that lay ahead, waiting to be unveiled like a masterpiece hidden beneath layers of old paint. As summer faded into autumn, the mansion came alive with color, both from the changing leaves outside and the vibrant canvases that now adorned its walls. Betty's artistic renaissance had been nothing short of miraculous. Her paintings, bursting with emotion and skill, transformed the once sterile rooms into a gallery of life and memory. John found himself spending more and more time in Betty's studio, watching her work and listening to her stories. There was something about her that felt inexplicably familiar, a connection he couldn't quite place but cherished nonetheless. One crisp October morning, as John sipped his coffee and scrolled through his emails, an advertisement caught his eye. The local art museum was hosting a competition for emerging artists, with the winner's work to be featured in a special exhibition. Excited by the prospect, John rushed to the studio to share the news with Betty. He found her lost in concentration, adding delicate brushstrokes to a landscape that seemed to shimmer with an inner light. "Betty," he called softly, not wanting to startle her, "I've got something to show you." She turned, her face lighting up at the sight of him. "Good morning, John. What's got you so excited?" He showed her the advertisement on his tablet, watching as her eyes widened with interest. "This is perfect for you," he said enthusiastically. "Your work deserves to be seen by the world." But to his surprise, Betty's expression clouded over. She shook her head, turning back to her painting. "Oh, I don't know, John. It's been so long since I've shown my work publicly. I'm not sure I'm ready for that kind of scrutiny." John frowned, puzzled by her reaction. "But Betty, your paintings are incredible. You have nothing to fear from critics or judges." She sighed, putting down her brush. "It's not just about the art, John. There are some complications. Things from my past that I'd rather not stir up." Intrigued and concerned, John pulled up a stool next to her. "What kind of complications?" "Betty, you can trust me. Whatever it is, I want to help." Betty was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the half-finished landscape before her. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Many years ago, I was involved with a man named Frank. He was an art collector, charming and sophisticated. I thought he loved me, but what he really loved was the potential profit in my work." John listened intently as Betty's story unfolded. She told him of how Frank had manipulated her, isolating her from friends and family, convincing her that he alone understood her talent. He had sold her paintings for exorbitant sums, pocketing most of the profits for himself. "But that wasn't the worst of it," Betty continued, her hands trembling slightly. "When I finally gathered the courage to leave him, he threatened me, said he'd ruin my reputation in the art world if I ever painted again." John felt a surge of anger on Betty's behalf. "That's terrible, Betty. But surely after all these years his threats don't still hold power." Betty shook her head sadly. "You don't understand, John. Frank was well connected. He made good on his threats. My work was discredited. Galleries refused to show my paintings. I lost everything, my career, my home, even my daughter." "Your daughter?" John asked, surprised. This was the first time Betty had mentioned having a child. A look of profound sadness crossed Betty's face. "Yes, my Sarah. She was just a teenager when all this happened. With nowhere else to go, she went to live with my sister. I haven't seen her in over 2 decades. John's heart ached for Betty. He reached out, taking her paint-stained hand in his. "I'm so sorry you went through all that, Betty. But don't you see? This competition could be your chance to reclaim your place in the art world, to show Frank and everyone else that your talent can't be suppressed." Betty looked uncertain, but John could see a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Do you really think so?" "I know so," John said firmly. "And I'll be with you every step of the way. We'll enter your work in the competition, and when you win, because I know you will, we'll use that platform to tell your story. To expose Frank for the fraud he is." Tears welled up in Betty's eyes, but she smiled through them. "Oh, John, you have your mother's heart, you know that. So full of kindness and determination." John blinked, taken aback by the comment. "My mother? Did you know her?" Betty's eyes widened as if realizing she'd said too much. She quickly turned back to her painting. "Oh, I just meant, well, you've told me so much about her. I feel like I know her through you." John nodded, but a nagging feeling persisted. There was something Betty wasn't telling him, some piece of the puzzle he couldn't quite grasp. But he pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on the task at hand. Over the next few weeks, John and Betty worked tirelessly to prepare for the competition. They selected her 3 strongest pieces, a haunting portrait, a vibrant abstract, and the shimmering landscape she'd been working on when John first mentioned the competition. As the submission deadline approached, Betty's nerves began to fray. More than once, John found her in the studio, staring at her paintings with a mixture of pride and terror. "What if he finds out?" she asked one evening, her voice small. "What if Frank sees my work and comes looking for me?" John put a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Then we'll face him together." "You're not alone anymore, Betty. I won't let anyone hurt you." The day of the submission arrived, and John insisted on personally delivering Betty's paintings to the museum. As he carefully placed each canvas in his car, he felt a sense of anticipation. Something told him that this competition was going to change everything, not just for Betty, but for him as well. What John couldn't have known was just how prophetic that feeling would turn out to be. As he drove towards the museum, Betty's paintings safely secured in the back seat, the wheels of fate were already in motion. The art competition would indeed change everything, bringing to light secrets that had been buried for decades and forcing both John and Betty to confront truths they never could have imagined. Little did they know that across town, in a luxurious penthouse overlooking the city, a man named Frank was leafing through the local newspaper. His eyes narrowed as they fell on a small article announcing the upcoming art competition. A smile, cold and calculating, spread across his face. "Well, well," he murmured to himself, "this should be interesting." As John pulled into the museum parking lot, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was on the cusp of something monumental. He had no way of knowing that the simple act of submitting Betty's paintings was about to set in motion a chain of events that would unravel the very fabric of his life, revealing truths that had been hidden in plain sight all along. The weeks following the submission of Betty's artwork to the competition were filled with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. John found himself checking his email obsessively, hoping for news from the museum. Betty, on the other hand, seemed to retreat into herself, spending long hours in the studio working on a new series of paintings that she kept carefully covered whenever John entered the room. It was on a chilly November morning when the email finally arrived. John's hand trembled as he opened it, his heart racing. As his eyes scanned the contents, a grin spread across his face. "Betty," he called out, rushing to the studio. "Betty, you've done it. You're a finalist." He burst into the room to find Betty standing before an easel, her back to him. She turned slowly, her face pale and her eyes wide with a mixture of excitement and fear. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. John nodded, holding out his tablet for her to see. "3 finalists and you're one of them. There's going to be an exhibition next month and then they'll announce the winner." Betty sank onto a nearby stool, her legs seeming to give out beneath her. "Oh my," she breathed. "I never thought." After all these years, John knelt beside her, taking her paint-stained hands in his. "You deserve this, Betty. Your talent deserves to be recognized." As the reality of the situation sank in, Betty's expression shifted from shock to determination. "You're right," she said, straightening her shoulders. "It's time I stopped hiding. Time I reclaimed my voice." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. John hired a team to help prepare Betty's paintings for the exhibition, ensuring they were properly framed and displayed to their best advantage. He also arranged for a new wardrobe for Betty, wanting her to feel confident and elegant at the opening night. As the day of the exhibition drew near, John couldn't help but notice Betty's growing restlessness. He often found her staring off into space, a faraway look in her eyes. "Is everything all right?" he asked her one evening as they sat in the garden watching the sunset. Betty sighed, turning to face him. "John, there's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you a long time ago." But before she could continue, they were interrupted by Mrs. Rodriguez, who came hurrying out of the house with John's phone in her hand. "Mr. Smith," she said, slightly out of breath, "there's a call for you, a Mr. Michael Andrews. He says it's urgent." John frowned, not recognizing the name. He took the phone, excusing himself from Betty, who watched him with an unreadable expression. "Hello, this is John Smith," he said into the phone. "Mr. Smith," came a gravelly voice from the other end. "My name is Mike Andrews. I'm an old friend of Betty's from art school. I've been trying to track her down for years, and I've reason to believe she might be staying with you." John's eyebrows shot up in surprise. He glanced at Betty, who was still watching him intently. "May I ask what this is regarding?" he asked cautiously. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "It's about Frank," Mike finally said. "He's back in town and he's looking for Betty. I'm worried he might try to interfere with the exhibition." A chill ran down John's spine. He thanked Mike for the information and promised to pass on the message to Betty. As he hung up, he turned to find Betty standing right behind him, her face ashen. "It was Mike, wasn't it?" she asked, her voice trembling. "And he told you about Frank?" John nodded, leading Betty back to their seats. "Betty, why didn't you tell me Frank was still a threat? We need to do something. Contact the police, perhaps." Betty shook her head vehemently. "No, no police. John, there's so much you don't know, so much I haven't told you." "Then tell me now," John urged. "Betty, whatever it is, we can face it together." Betty took a deep breath, her eyes meeting John's with an intensity that took him aback. "John, the reason I never told you about Frank, about my past, it's because it's all tied up with your past too." John frowned, confused. "My past? What do you mean?" "Your mother, Sarah," Betty said softly. "She wasn't just my friend, John, she was my daughter." The world seemed to tilt on its axis as John struggled to process Betty's words. "What? But that would mean your grandmother," Betty finished for him, tears welling in her eyes. "Yes, John, I'm your grandmother." John felt as if all the air had been sucked out of his lungs. He stared at Betty, seeing her in a whole new light. The familiar blue eyes, the artistic talent, the inexplicable connection he'd felt from the beginning. It all suddenly made sense. "But why?" he managed to choke out. "Why didn't you tell me?" Betty's tears were flowing freely now. "I was afraid, John. Afraid of Frank. Afraid of the past. Afraid of how you might react. Your mother, my Sarah, she made me promise to stay away, to keep you safe from the chaos of our past." As Betty's story poured out, John learned the full extent of the tragedy that had shaped both their lives. Frank, it turned out, wasn't just a manipulative art dealer. He was John's grandfather, a man whose greed and ambition had torn the family apart. "Your mother tried to expose Frank's fraudulent dealings," Betty explained, "but he was too powerful, too well connected. He threatened to destroy us all if we didn't keep quiet." John's mind was reeling. "But my father, I always thought he died in an accident." Betty's face crumpled with grief. "Oh, John, that was the biggest lie of all. Your father, Tom, he was a good man." He stood by Sarah, tried to help her bring Frank to justice. But Frank, he made sure Tom would never testify. The implication hung heavy in the air. John felt as if he might be sick. "Are you saying Frank had my father killed?" Betty nodded, unable to speak through her tears. John stood abruptly, pacing the garden as he tried to process this flood of information. His entire life, everything he thought he knew about his family, had been built on a foundation of lies. As the shock began to subside, it was replaced by a burning anger. Frank hadn't just threatened Betty or ruined her career, he had destroyed their entire family, robbed John of his parents, of the truth about his heritage. John turned back to Betty, his jaw set with determination. "We're going to make this right," he said firmly. "We're going to expose Frank for what he is, and we're going to do it at the exhibition." Betty looked up at him, hope and fear warring in her eyes. "But John, he's dangerous. If he finds out I'm here, that you know the truth." John knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "We're family, Betty. We face this together. No more running, no more hiding. It's time for the truth to come out." As they sat there in the fading light, grandmother and grandson finally united, neither could have predicted the storm that was about to break over their lives. The upcoming exhibition would be more than just a showcase of Betty's art. It would be the stage for a long overdue reckoning, a chance to right the wrongs of the past and reclaim the family that had been stolen from them. Little did they know that Frank was already making his own plans, setting in motion events that would bring their carefully constructed world crashing down around them. The final confrontation was approaching, and the stakes couldn't be higher. The night of the exhibition arrived, bringing with it a palpable tension that hung in the air like a storm about to break. The local art museum was abuzz with activity, its halls filled with the quiet murmur of anticipation as art enthusiasts, critics, and curious locals filtered in. John adjusted his tie nervously as he stood at the entrance, greeting guests and keeping a watchful eye out for any sign of Frank. Betty, resplendent in a deep blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes, stood nearby, her hands clasped tightly to stop them from shaking. "Are you ready for this?" John asked softly, giving her arm a reassuring squeeze. Betty took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, a mix of determination and fear in her voice. As they made their way into the main gallery, John couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. Betty's paintings, displayed prominently on the stark white walls, were drawing gasps of admiration from the attendees. Her vibrant use of color, the depth of emotion captured in each brushstroke, it was all there for the world to see and appreciate. "Mrs. Elizabeth Crowley," a voice called out, causing Betty to freeze in her tracks. They turned to see a man in his 60s approaching, a wide smile on his face. "I can't believe it's really you." "Mike," Betty breathed, her face lighting up with recognition. She embraced the man warmly. "Oh, it's so good to see you." John watched as Betty introduced him to Mike Andrews, her old friend from art school. Mike's eyes widened as he realized who John was. "My God," he said softly. "You're the spitting image of your father." Before John could respond, a hush fell over the crowd. He turned to see what had caused the sudden silence and felt his blood run cold. Walking through the entrance, looking every bit the distinguished art collector in his tailored suit, was Frank. John felt Betty's hand grip his arm tightly. "He's here," she whispered, fear evident in her voice. "It's okay," John reassured her, though his own heart was racing. "We knew this might happen. We're prepared." Frank made his way through the crowd, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on Betty. A cold smile spread across his face as he approached. "Elizabeth," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "Can't been far too long. I must say I was surprised to see your name among the finalists. I thought you'd given up painting years ago." Betty lifted her chin defiantly. "Hello, Frank. I'm afraid you were mistaken. I never gave up painting. I just stopped letting you profit from my talent." Frank's smile didn't waver, but John could see a dangerous glint in his eyes. Now, my dear. Let's not dredge up ancient history. I'm simply here to appreciate the art." "Is that so?" John interjected, stepping forward. "Or are you here to threaten and manipulate just like you've always done?" Frank's gaze shifted to John, a flicker of recognition passing over his face. "And who might you be, young man?" "John Smith," he replied, his voice steady despite the anger churning inside him. "But you might know me better as Sarah's son." "Your grandson." The color drained from Frank's face, his composure cracking for the first time. "That's impossible," he hissed. "Sarah would never—" "Never what?" John pressed. "Never tell me the truth about my family, about how you destroyed our lives, how you had my father killed." The surrounding crowd had gone deathly quiet, all eyes on the unfolding drama. Frank glanced around nervously, aware of the attention they were drawing. "I don't know what lies you've been told," he began, but John cut him off. "No more lies, Frank. It's time for the truth to come out." He turned to address the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have an announcement to make. The artist you know as Elizabeth Crowley is not just a talented painter. She is also a victim of years of manipulation and fraud perpetrated by this man, Frank Holloway." Murmurs rippled through the crowd as John continued, laying out the whole sordid tale. Frank's exploitation of Betty's talent, his threats and manipulation, the tragic fate of John's parents. With each revelation, Frank seemed to shrink, his carefully cultivated image crumbling before their eyes. "You can't prove any of this," Frank snarled, but his bravado was failing him. "Actually, we can." Mike stepped forward, producing a folder from his jacket. "I've spent years gathering evidence, Frank. Financial records, witness statements, even the police report from Tom's accident. It's all here." As Mike handed the folder to a stunned museum curator, chaos erupted in the gallery. Reporters who had come to cover the exhibition were suddenly scrambling for the story of a lifetime. Art critics who had praised Frank's eye for talent over the years looked on in horror as their own reputations were called into question. In the midst of it all, John felt a tug on his sleeve. He turned to find Betty, tears streaming down her face but a look of profound relief in her eyes. "It's over," she whispered. "After all these years, it's finally over." John pulled her into a tight embrace, feeling the weight of decades of secrets and fear lifting from both their shoulders. As they stood there, surrounded by the beautiful paintings that represented Betty's reclaimed voice, John knew that this was more than just the end of Frank's reign of manipulation. It was the beginning of a new chapter for both of them, a chance to be the family they should have been all along. But even as the truth came to light and justice seemed within reach, neither John nor Betty could have anticipated the final twist that fate had in store for them, a revelation that would test the bounds of their newfound relationship and force them to confront the true meaning of family and forgiveness. In the days following the exhibition, John and Betty found themselves at the center of a media storm. The story of Frank's fraud and the family's tragic history had captured the public's imagination, turning their private pain into a public spectacle. Despite the chaos, there was a sense of relief that permeated the mansion. The truth was finally out, and Frank was facing the consequences of his actions. The police had launched a full investigation into Tom's death, and Frank's art-dealing empire was crumbling as galleries and collectors distanced themselves from him. One quiet evening, as John and Betty sat in the garden, enjoying a moment of peace, John broached a subject that had been weighing on his mind. "Betty," he said softly, "I've been thinking about my mother, about Sarah. You said she made you promise to stay away to keep me safe, but why? Why didn't she ever tell me the truth?" Betty's eyes misted over as she gazed into the distance, lost in memories. "Oh, John, Sarah loved you more than anything in this world. After what happened to Tom, she was terrified that Frank would come after you next. She thought that if you knew nothing about your past, about your connection to Frank, you'd be safer." John nodded, understanding but still feeling the ache of years of unanswered questions. "I wish I could talk to her one last time," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "There's so much I want to ask, so much I want to tell her." Betty reached out, taking his hand in hers. "I might be able to help with that," she said, a small smile playing on her lips. "Come with me." She led John back to her studio, where she unveiled a painting she had been working on in secret. John's breath caught in his throat as he saw the image before him. It was a portrait of his mother, Sarah, captured in vivid detail. Her kind eyes seemed to look right at him, filled with love and a hint of sadness. "I started this the day after the exhibition," Betty explained. "I wanted to give you a piece of her, something to help you feel connected." Tears welled up in John's eyes as he stared at the portrait. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "Thank you, Betty. This means more to me than you could ever know." As they stood there admiring the painting, a knock at the door startled them. Mrs. Rodriguez appeared, looking slightly flustered. "Mr. Smith, there's someone here to see you and Mrs. Crowley," she said. She says she's Sarah Smith." John and Betty exchanged shocked glances. It couldn't be possible, could it? They rushed to the foyer, hearts pounding. Standing there, looking older and more careworn than in Betty's painting, but unmistakably alive, was Sarah Smith, John's mother and Betty's daughter. "Mom," John choked out, hardly daring to believe his eyes. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she looked at her son. "John," she breathed, "oh my boy, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." The next few hours were a blur of tears, explanations, and long overdue embraces. Sarah explained how she had faked her death to protect John from Frank, how she had been living under an assumed name, watching her son from afar, but never daring to reach out. "When I saw the news about the exhibition, about Frank being exposed, I knew it was time to come home," Sarah said, holding tight to both John and Betty's hands. "I couldn't stay away any longer." As the night wore on and the initial shock of Sarah's return began to fade, the three generations sat together, piecing together the fragments of their shared history. There were moments of pain as old wounds were reopened, but also moments of laughter as happier memories were shared. In the early hours of the morning, as the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows, John looked at the two women beside him, his grandmother and his mother, and felt a sense of completeness he had never known before. "So what happens now?" he asked, voicing the question that hung in the air. Sarah smiled, squeezing his hand. "Now, we start over. We be the family we were always meant to be." Betty nodded in agreement. "No more secrets, no more hiding. We face whatever comes next together." As they sat there, the morning sun bathing them in its warm glow, John realized that his journey had come full circle. The lonely millionaire who had offered shelter to a homeless woman had found not just companionship, but his true heritage, his family, and a sense of belonging he had always craved. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be legal battles to face, wounds to heal, and years of lost time to make up for. But as John looked at his mother and grandmother, he knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as a family. In the end, it wasn't wealth or success that had filled the void in John's life. It was love, truth, and the unbreakable bonds of family. A masterpiece more valuable than any painting, more enduring than any fortune. As they began to plan for their new life together, John couldn't help but smile. The mansion that had once felt so empty was now filled with the warmth of family, the joy of reunions, and the promise of a future brighter than any of them could have imagined. And in Betty's studio, the portrait of Sarah watched over them all, a testament to the power of art to heal, to remember, and to bring people together across time and distance.